OpenAI with the launch of GPT 4.1.
Artificial intelligence could finally bridge the gap in healthcare that we've had in underserved regions.
Claude this week out with some new announcements as well, particularly around user-facing tools. ByteDance just launched Seaweed. It's an ultra-efficient 7 billion parameter AI video generating model.
AI can potentially negotiate peace deals more effectively than humans.
NVIDIA has kicked off the US-based manufacturing of its advanced chips and supercomputers, building factories in Arizona and Texas, aiming for mass production within the next year.
Meta pushing the line again between data-driven AI and data privacy.
Microsoft introduced a new powerful computer use feature in Copilot Studio. Grok launched Grok Studio along with Google Drive integration.
Is China winning the AI deployment race by prioritizing speed over model innovation?
Welcome back to What the AI, where we decode the latest developments in the world of artificial intelligence.
Hey, Jeff, how's it going?
Good. How you doing, Amy?
I'm doing pretty well. I was traveling this week for work, so I was in Ohio. And, when you spend a lot of time on planes, you spend a lot of time just sort of scrolling your Instagram or your Twitter or whatever, your Facebook. So how about you? Do you need another social network in your life?
I feel like I need one fewer social network, not one more. Is there a new social network on the scene that I need to be aware of?
Well, OpenAI is rumored to be making a social network, which is sort of hilarious because, as you know, there's sort of a joke that every product eventually expands till it becomes a social network. And we might be seeing that with OpenAI, apparently.
I felt like that was the old train. I felt like every product was going to become a chatbot now, and they were ahead of the curve. I feel like that was the old curve. And I don't know why they want to hop on that every product expands till it becomes a social network. But I did see this rumor. It kind of made me laugh. Don't know if it's real or not.
Well, I guess we'll find out. It remains to be seen. Well, from rumor to reality, tell us what we got in AI radar.
All right, so let's get the rundown of the latest news. We'll stick on the OpenAI theme for a while with the launch of GPT 4.1. So GPT 4.1 out the door. Now, if you go into ChatGPT and look for it in the model picker, you will not find it because you cannot use it in ChatGPT. It is a developer-only model available in the API. And it's got, I think, a couple different versions, a mini, a nano, and it's very focused on coding abilities and some other stuff. But, very good, very much cheaper. But not in the web interface, which was fascinating to me. It's like you can't. I went to the web picker. Well, where is it? How can I use 4.1 and test it out? I couldn't do it.
And I don't think you're the target market, right? Because it's a model that's sort of targeted towards the LLM developer stack as opposed to the sort of super user stack. So that's an interesting sort of pivot from what we've seen more recently from OpenAI.
It is. And in reverse of that, interestingly, Claude this week out with some new announcements as well, who we've thought of as their primary business right now is selling API to developers, and they're embedded in a lot of the coding apps. But they had a couple of new announcements, particularly around user-facing tools. So this week, they released a research tool similar to deep research, so you can get kind of more in-depth research using, Sonnet 3.7. And also one of my favorite features, which was a Google Workspace integration. And this was a little step above what OpenAI has. So in ChatGPT, you can attach a Google Doc to a chat for context. But here it can actually search across your Gmail, search across your Google Docs to help you answer questions. And one of the tests I have for Gmail search is, I've got a meeting coming up with so-and-so. Can you look at all my past meeting notes and whatever and tell me catch me up? And I got to tell you, Claude search across Gmail is now better than Gemini search across Gmail. It was by far the best answer on that I got from any of the tools I tried. So impressive user-facing integrations for Claude, who we thought were the API guys.
Yeah, I thought this was super interesting. Is this sort of a Anthropic Trojan horse? Getting in with Google gets some sort of major distribution and maybe a sneaky competitor to Copilot?
I don't know. It was really fascinating to see this out there, and to see them focused on the user-facing tools. And it is the first time in a long time that a feature I want has come out not in ChatGPT. Like advanced voice came out, deep research came out, thought models came out, all first in ChatGPT. And now I'm kind of going, maybe I need to use Claude a little more because it's really great at searching my Gmail and my Google Docs. And so, I'm sure we'll be fast followed by others, but interesting to see them innovating on the user front, not just the model and particularly coding oriented models that go into the cursors and the bolts that are kind of those coding tools that developers use and love the Sonnet models for.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Last week we spent a lot of time talking about trust and privacy, particularly in the EU, where they've said we're sort of going to lead the way on this. Back on the home front, Claude has sort of been the one that leads the way in sort of trust and privacy as a core part of their brand. So it'll be interesting to see with that as a core part of their brand and integrated with this major distribution channel, it might be more appealing for things like highly regulated industries, finance, healthcare, et cetera, to sort of go in that choice because it's the sort of more ethical AI choice relative to the charismatic genius that ChatGPT is.
Yeah, we'll have to see how that plays out over time. But we'll move on to our next story here. ByteDance just launched Seaweed. I gotta say, first time I'm really kind of loving a name for a model like Seaweed. That's kind of it's fun, it's whimsical. I like it. It's an ultra efficient 7 billion parameter AI video generating model that delivers results competitive with much larger models like Google's VO and Alibaba's Wan 2.1 with a lot fewer resources. So it's really good at text to video, image to video, synchronized audio outputs, kind of complex storytelling, lip syncing, which is one of those really hard things to do, audio, video to get right. Most importantly, something we've seen a lot from Chinese companies, a more efficient model to do this. And that seems to be a recurring theme here that we see world breaking capabilities coming out, maybe Google VO 2.0 or Imagen, and then quickly, nearly as capable, much more efficient models coming out from Chinese competitors, which is an interesting trend.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you've said before speed is your favorite feature. This model is sort of small and smart, right? And that can make it speedier.
Small, smart, and that will make it fast. That's right. Smaller is faster. And sometimes faster is better than better. That doesn't make any sense. But, less is more kind of way. A pretty good answer faster can be better than a slightly better answer that takes longer. So we'll see. All right, last couple stories for us. NVIDIA has kicked off the US-based manufacturing of its advanced chips and supercomputers. So I'm not going to give a lot of credit to Donald Trump for making this happen. A lot of this was announcements that had been made in advance of some of the most recent tariffs. But they are building factories in Arizona and Texas, aiming for mass production within the next year. And could be a lot of development of some of the more high-end chips coming here to the US. So we'll see if that plays out. This is one of those really interesting things to me that you never really know. A, will it be the cutting edge chips? And B, will these things actually get built or just, hey, we'd like to do it. And then it turns out we can't get those chips made here because we don't have enough of the right facilities, the right people, the right resources and workers. And so we'll see what really comes of this. But they're at least making the noises that I think the current administration wants to hear.
Yeah, I mean, this is gonna be interesting to see how it plays out because if it is true, this is potentially like the most important AI story that no one's talking about because it seems sort of so back end, but this would be a major move towards US-based infrastructure, US jobs, all of the sort of things that I think there's been a lot of discussion that we want to see, and so we'll see how it what plays out here, but, I think this could be a really important initiative, and an expensive one funded by a combination of public and private funding, which is also, interesting to see.
Very expensive, but also in the list of things, if you think about what we really want to see onshore, there's kind of jobs and manufacturing stuff. I think the jobs in manufacturing are not as multitudinous as people would like to believe. But there's also the national security of like, are all of our advanced chips going to come from an island just off the coast of a geopolitical rival his of contested political history, speaking of course of Taiwan. And so onsourcing, bringing these kinds of chip manufacturing back stateside actually has a big national security component as well as an economic component. So it's kind of the part that's maybe most important and interesting to see some motion in that direction.
Yeah, very interesting.
All right, last two stories here. We got Microsoft introduced a new powerful computer use feature in Copilot Studio, which allows developers to build agents that can have their agents use computers kind of the way we've seen in ChatGPT's operator and Claude's computer use, where you can kind of like navigate, open up a browser in the cloud and navigate around and do stuff. But they've now added this to their Copilot Studio so that people can actually use this kind of computer use in the agents that they're building for Microsoft customers. So I think Microsoft is doubling down on we're not going to be the consumer folks, but if you're going to build this stuff in the enterprise, we're going to have all the models and capabilities available to you to build on top of our cloud and platform to do that.
Yeah, I know Copilot, we've talked about it before, but they're just the enterprise use case is really great, and so it's just tying it back to that Claude story. We'll see if Claude can, with its integration with Google, catch up to some of these, sort of Copilot-like, features that I think people I have not used them because 'cause I'm not a Microsoft user, but what I hear is that people really love using them and that they're very useful, so
Yeah, absolutely. And then in our last story, this was interesting to me because you got Grok that kind of comes out of nowhere to be leading edge competitor, state of the art, capable model in Grok 3, kind of unbelievable execution. And they've launched Grok Studio. So this is kind of the collaborative content creation and code execution. So where you can kind of co-edit a document with or co-edit code with the AI. They've launched that along with Google Drive integration, none of which are state of the art, but all of which are kind of catching up the feature gaps that Grok had with the state of the art, not just models, but experiences. So kind of adding all those feature capabilities that I love in ChatGPT, and they're coming to Grok. So impressive to see them continue to kind of just catch up really rapidly to the places they were behind. It's kind of unbelievable how much they just came out of nowhere and have really a state of the art now model and arguably user experience.
Yeah, agreed. Sort of approaching from the back, but seems to be approaching the front space here. So we'll see how they continue to develop.
Yeah, I can't imagine how many pokers Elon's got in the fight. Like, you would have thought Doge was enough, but Doge, X, Tesla, Space, you got to just keep them all. But this one, I mean, the execution level here pretty impressive for where they've just come out of nowhere. So I wanted to keep an eye on in the future.
For sure.
All right. Well, I think it's time for us to move to our AI in the wild segment where we zoom in on how AI is being used out in the real world by companies, communities, and creators. Annie, what have you got for us in practical AI deployments? Like what's going on in the wild?
Practical AI deployments, Jeff, really interesting deployment in developing countries of using AI to identify tuberculosis. So, what we've seen here, or what we are seeing, is that AI, artificial intelligence, could finally bridge the gap that healthcare has, the gap in healthcare that we've had in underserved regions, pardon me.
Mm.
So, groundbreaking AI powered ultrasound technology could hold the answer to accurate tuberculosis diagnosis faster. So what we see sort of here when we need to develop tuberculosis diagnosis is we see X-rays and labs and sort of these tools that are very expensive and hard to make sort of widespread. And when you have areas where those tools are not available and tuberculosis is a much bigger problem, this ultrasound technology is really the only type of technology that's available. It's something you can put in a backpack, but ultrasound traditionally relies on a human interpreter, a radiologist, to actually read them. And so you have, human error associated with that. You have the bottleneck of how many humans do you have to read it, et cetera. But this AI based model that can actually read the output of the ultrasound, you don't have to be as much of an expert, has a huge promise here to actually increase the sort of speed to which the diagnosis can happen. And of course, then the treatment can happen as well. And it's surprisingly accurate, 91% sensitivity, 85% specificity, which is exceeding the sort of human accuracy by 9%. So this is going to be a huge unlock for democratizing healthcare in
Yes.
some of these regions where these diseases are still a huge problem.
This story struck with me in number. First of all, the name for their point of care ultrasound, POCUS, like that's just again seaweed. I love these fun names. They made a nice acronym out of that. But this was really cool in that it both showed that you could beat world leading experts in terms of accuracy of reading these ultrasounds, but then deploying that in a way where it actually reached into underserved communities, countries, places where this is really needed and where you're not going to get like I don't know what they thought the alternative was, but like sub-Saharan Africa, places where you have real TB problems, like, you're not sending world-leading experts in radiology to read the ultrasounds in the hospitals. Like, that's just not really the alternative. But these happen to be better, and I think they said that it exceeded the standards for and I don't know how to pronounce this word, sputum, spit
Sputum.
test for TB. I don't know how you pronounce that word, but I'm pretty sure it means the spit, actual saliva-based tests. And they actually are exceeding the expectations for the WHO's tests of that nature. So really able to be deployed pretty, I think, rapidly and meeting the standard of care.
Yeah, exactly. So this is going to be a good one to watch. And again, we talk so much about sort of the exciting technology that we see in AI and how it can be deployed for efficiency in business and this type of stuff. But really, the most exciting deployments of AI are the ones that can solve big global problems, and these diseases are chief among those.
But and one maybe interesting thing to take away for our audience, more practical, is like they're deploying these models on phones. And so the idea of how do you get models that are small enough to do something useful that can be deployed in the field? You think about retail businesses or anywhere that has lots of locations, remote locations, where this kind of capability, where you might have use for AI models. Really interesting to see them taking just kind of consumer grade hardware that can run not obviously large LLMs, but these kinds of models that can be super useful in the field and made much easier to deploy, even when there's not connectivity or other things. I think a really interesting aspect of the story as well.
Absolutely. Well, Jeff, earlier in the week, I saw a story about a model that was being developed that's basically like an LLM that can help us communicate with dolphins. So that's an interesting AI in the wild story. But then even more wild than that, later in the week, we saw a story where we saw AI can potentially negotiate peace deals more effectively than humans. So even more important than dealing with,
Now, tell me about this one.
how
I
to communicate with dolphins,
feel like this
let's
is a
talk about how
highly
to communicate
relevant
with
kind of
world leaders.
model right now. Like negotiate peace deals feels like something we could really use. Tell me about where you read about this because this sounds super valuable to the world right now.
100%. So, AI-based models are now stepping into the high-stakes arena of international diplomacy, particularly focused on aiding negotiations in resolving complex conflicts like the ongoing war between Ukraine and Russia. So, this project, Ukraine-Russia Peace Agreement Simulator, developed by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, leverages expert insights, historical peace agreements, detailed scenario modeling, across different negotiation areas, including things like territory security, justice, economics. And then the AI model assessed sort of different strategic outcomes and plans, and it sort of modeled out this is what this outcome would look like and this outcome would look like. It modeled these things. It sort of drafted the proposed agreements between these leaders. The AI took on the persona of some of influential leaders and historical strategists, and sort of helping to aid diplomats in anticipating the strategy around different tactics and outcomes based on the personalities involved. This is super interesting to see, obviously super high stakes. This was a concurrent sort of focus, University of California, Berkeley, with backing from Britain's Foreign Office, developing this sort of advisor-based U.S. National Security Council negotiation support. So we will see how this sort of plays out. But I think really what we can think about this is AI training the human diplomats on how to be better diplomats, right? And that is a really, really interesting concept to think about.
It was fascinating to me, and it also that they were using this to simulate the potential responses to negotiating strategies, but also just outcomes of what would Xi Jinping think? Like, let's give it all the stuff Xi Jinping's ever said and done, and Vladimir Putin and Vladimir Zelensky, whoever it is, Donald Trump, who you take your world leader that you need to care about. And it was really interesting that in my mind they were using this for two things. One, how would these guys think about an outcome for the negotiation, but also for the negotiator who goes, "Oh, I've got to go back and ask my," they can actually, they were using it potentially as a tool for the US negotiator to know what the US president and secretary of state and national security advisor and whoever else might think about a deal so they could, not wait for the answer to come back, but be able to have some idea of what's happening. And my understanding is they're working on adding a game theory base to this so it can not only look at singular outcomes and what people might think, but also, hey, how early should I make a concession or not make a concession? Or what order might I make concessions in to get the maximum benefit for this? So you can actually play out different scenarios with the different personalities who are involved to figure out not only what are the things that might be able to be given to get the things that are valuable to you, but what's the ordering that makes sense in terms of how we play push or pull or give or kind of play hardball. So really fascinating to see that play out, and be interested to hear the reviews when people start using this in the real world, how it works. But just fascinating kind of idea to simulate those things in AI.
For sure. And, you and I have joked before about using AI to simulate peace deals in our own homes and stuff like that, right? Like,
That's
how do
right.
I simulate this conversation with my teenager or my spouse or my partner? Or, I use this particular use of AI all the time at work where I'll basically, if I'm about to have a difficult conversation with somebody who I know has a different point of view, I'll say, this is this person's point of view and their background and their context. And I'll just sort of role play with I use ChatGPT for this usually, but I'll role play the scenario. So this is obviously a much higher stakes sort of
Mhm.
and much deeper sort of trained on specific historical context, sort of a specific use case here, but it's the same concept. And so this is like, if you're not, for our listeners, if you're not already using AI to sort of help you pre-prepare for difficult conversations, I think you're missing out on one of the sort of best opportunities that AI can bring. You feel so much more confident going into that conversation. You sort of have played out all of the different things and you know how you might respond. Um, so I think that's actually a really powerful tool that AI can help train us on when we're about to have hard talks.
Absolutely. No talk's harder than negotiating peace deals, I suppose. If it can work there, it can certainly work for your difficult conversations at work. Although maybe negotiating with teenagers is harder. I don't know. It's a debatable topic, I think, but certainly can help there too.
For sure. Well, I guess it depends on your teenager.
It does. All right. Well, to wrap things up, let's dive into the AI alignment section where things get philosophical and political. Annie, what do you got for us in AI alignment this week? Feels like there's a lot going on.
There is a lot going on, and I think the theme of the week is pushing the boundaries. And so
Right.
we've seen sort of two really important stories come out that are really on the edge of sort of companies or super users pushing the boundaries of how we think about sort of the legal framework around AI. So perhaps not surprisingly, my first boundary pusher is Mark Zuckerberg himself. I don't think that that comes to anyone
No
surprise to
surprise
anyone,
there.
but
No surprise.
Meta pushing the line again between data-driven AI and data privacy. So what we are seeing is that Meta has sort of come out and said in the EU, we are going to launch our product where we actually train the model on the posts, comments, and interactions that people have put on Facebook from sort of European countries. They're saying this is super important because it can pick up the sort of cultural sensitivities and importance and dialects of those specific regions, so they need to do it. It's very legitimate, business use case for them to make their product relevant. Otherwise, their product just sounds like a bunch of Silicon Valley people, which is maybe less relevant in the EU. But what they've also specifically sort of said is this is gonna be a default opt-in, and you have to actually go in and opt yourself out if you don't want your data to be used, in that. So they're really sort of pushing the limits on, sort of the spirit of GDPR. I think they've come up with sort of their legal arguments about why they are in technical compliance, but really it's the spirit that they're trying to push up against, and so it's kind of a
I'm
difficult needle to thread.
I'm curious to see how the, regulators respond. I mean, the EU has pushed pretty hard on this front, and so I'm curious how they respond. But also, I thought the rationale was so fascinating because you think of these models as gaining intelligence, and, like, what do random Facebook users' likes and posts and interactions and comments have to do with and, like, is there really that much extra intelligence versus you're trading it in there? And the idea that, like, sarcasm lands differently, tone of voice, idioms, nuance, and how speech is done is just different places, and without that information, you're all gonna sound like a bunch of Silicon Valley tech bros or whatever the corpus of data really sounds like is a really fascinating argument for why this is gonna enhance the capability of their tools for the local users in the EU. It wasn't intuitive to me that that would be true, but it makes a lot of sense when you think about it.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that they're maybe pushing up against, which I think is a really important debate for people to be having, is the sort of line between personal data and public data,
Mhm.
and which data really needs to be safeguarded, and I own it, and I get to decide when it's used and not used versus the stuff that's like, who cares? Who cares if people know that I liked this restaurant or that restaurant, or who cares if I have a preference for one thing versus the other. Obviously, I don't want you blasting out my social security number and bank account information and all this type of stuff. But if there's just like personal preference and how I talk and all that type of stuff, is that really my personal data? And how important is it to safeguard and sort of not train on that data unless I've chosen to do it? And I think that that's where a lot of folks would say GDPR goes a little bit too far.
Mm.
And I think what we're seeing from Meta here is Meta acknowledging, I think you've gone a little bit too far, because actually what we see with our consumer research and sort of putting out our product here is that people want highly personalized stuff, and the way to make it highly personalized is to train on their data, right? And so it is a sort of legitimate need for us, and of course the counter argument in the policy space is, well, no, like, you provide this network where people can post their stuff, and it's less open to the idea that it's a two-way street if I provide them stuff too. So it'll be interesting to see the response and to see how this plays out. But I'm really happy that Meta is actually just going forward and pushing it, because I think these are really important debates to be had, and we're gonna find out where it lands. And I'm glad it's Meta doing it because they're high profile. They have, so much data at stake here, so many different types of data and so on and so forth. So I think a lot of questions will be answered by seeing how this plays out.
All right. Who are our other boundary pushers? So they got a theme of boundary pushers. We got Mark Zuckerberg, who's pushed a lot of boundaries recently, style boundaries in particular. He seems to have really found a new style boundary for himself to push. But what's next on your list of boundary pushers?
Well, again, perhaps not surprising, the other boundary pusher I have for you this week is China itself. So, is China winning the AI deployment race by prioritizing speed over model innovation? So, what we're seeing, a new report out from China highlights the nationwide deployment of the AI platform DeepSeek in China's tertiary hospitals, with an emphasis on rapid, real-world implementation of AI systems. And so, what we're seeing China say here is, you know what? We're not gonna let perfect be the enemy of good. We are going to get AI out in the wild solving problems in a high stakes arena,
Yeah.
because it's an important area. It's life-saving, it's people's health, and, all else equal, even though it might not be perfect or it might not be fully optimized for every single use case you might, need it for, it's already pretty darn helpful and better than the status quo in a large majority of use cases, and so we're gonna get it out there, we're gonna get people start using it. And so this is a decidedly different approach from where we've seen sort of the US go, which is how are we gonna regulate? How are we gonna be very safe and cautious about this rollout so that we prevent any harm and sort of we maintain all of the legal and ethical safeguards? China's kinda going in the opposite direction and saying, "You know what? We're just gonna start using it, and hoping it solves some problems for us."
I read this report, I saw it, and it was fascinating to me because it's not super detailed. It got some examples of using it for a lab analysis and, automation of back office processes and some diagnostics. It's kind of a smorgasbord across, a handful of hospitals, but it really does highlight, like, I don't think you could create a similar list of hospitals in the US that are actively deploying AI in real clinical care today. And this question of, it's easy to diminish the success of AI, of Chinese companies and AI, because they're making the cheaper, smaller version of the latest model. And the frontier is really being pushed by American companies. But I think there's a real question when it comes to value in the market in the country. Like, is building the world-breaking model the thing that provides value, or is deploying the models that are out there, even if they're not quite as good, like widely across real important use cases, at the place where value is driven? And it reminds me of the thing you say all the time, Annie, which is you shouldn't be worried about AI taking your job. You should be worried about someone who uses AI better than you do taking your job. And I kind of wonder if this is the country level version of that, the country that uses AI better taking your place in the world, or exceeding your results in certain categories like healthcare or industrial production. It'll be a really interesting question if the Chinese system lets them move faster in taking advantage of these technologies, whether they can build the state of the art, if they can be state of the art in implementation. It's a fascinating question for the US and a lot of Western countries.
Yeah, I mean, that's a super interesting parallel because 'cause you're right, that is one of my favorite sayings, and this very much is at the country level, right? And I actually when I read this, I was thinking about, we've talked about Peter Attia's book Outlive before, I think on the pod, or at least individually. I don't know if we did it when we were recorded or not, but there's a story that he shares at the beginning of the book that really struck with me, where he had a patient who I forget the details of the patient. I think he had a gunshot wound or something like that, and this was a young man. And Peter Attia was new in his career. I think he was an intern at the time, and he had a choice between I can solve this problem here, like, not in the operating room, and potentially save the person's life, or I can follow the protocol, which is to take him up to the operating room, and do all of the sort of scrub in and all
Prep
this
and the
type of
whole
stuff,
thing.
all of the prep and the whole thing. But if I do that, he will die because he does not have that much time to get up there to that. And so, he took the risk and he saved the guy's life, but of course then he got in trouble because he didn't follow the hospital protocol and the hospital was at risk of lawsuit and all this type of stuff. And I think there's just so many examples of that where people are like indexing on being afraid of lawsuits as opposed to thinking about what is actually the spirit of what I'm trying to do. I'm here as a doctor, here to save people's life. And so if I'm optimizing for not getting sued and that means more people die, that's not great, right? And I think that's what we're seeing here. The Chinese government is like, there's a lot of good to be coming from these things, and so let's get them out there and let's use it. And so, I am excited to see how and if the US responds, but maybe not super hopeful that we will get quicker adoption. I don't think this is gonna push the US to move faster, but I think it's interesting to see for sure.
It may be a moment that highlights for policymakers and the public here in the US, the costs of a system that, and I think it's easy to criticize the US for being so risk averse, but I think it's also the reality of a system that's been successful for so long that, as you if you've been these things develop over time and they grow, and there's not a natural way to simplify processes and rules and procedures. It's kind of like natural that they grow and cruft, and you kind of takes a crisis moment to break through it and go, "Hey, let's rethink this in a smarter way." And maybe this will be a wake up call as we see, I think if you even we talk about Chinese cars, and you go see a BYD car, which you can't buy in the US, but man, like, they're really good. They're really nice cars. And I think when you start to see those comparisons, maybe it's a moment where we can step back and go, "Hey, how do we," like, it is important to us in a more real and visceral way that we get out of the way of these technologies and let them actually be deployed in the real world with, I'm sure, some degree of cost. But overall, you got to look at not what's the thing that gets worse, but what's the overall change? Like, do we get more good than we do bad? And that's maybe the calculus that we'll start to see playing out. So fascinating to watch, and interesting geopolitical context all the way around here between negotiating peace to worldwide healthcare. Lots of international stories this week.
Yeah, and I think the big point is everyone's using AI, right? Everyone is
Everyone
using AI from in all kinds of use cases, and so if you're not, it's time to get started. The AI train is coming, you better get on.
better get on. Well, that's it for this week on What the AI. We'll be back next week with more insights, breakdowns, and just WTF moments from the world of AI. Make sure to follow, subscribe, and share with someone who's trying to make smarter decisions in the age of AI. Annie, I'll see you next week.
See you next week.
Ready to expand your AI knowledge? Want to become the go-to AI expert in your organization? Take the next step with Upstart's AI certification for financial services. This comprehensive course simplifies the fundamentals of artificial intelligence for financial services professionals. Both the course and this podcast are brought to you by Upstart, whose leading AI lending marketplace connects millions of consumers to banks and credit unions that leverage Upstart's AI technology to deliver superior credit products, from personal loans to auto loans to home equity lines of credit. If you learned something useful this week, hit subscribe on YouTube or leave us a rating on iTunes or Spotify. Your support can help others discover What the AI. And finally, share your biggest AI questions and insights with us at email@whattheai.fm. We really do read every message, and we do our best to cover them all on the show.